Hello and welcome to the Night Owl Philanthropy podcast. What's your why? I'm your host, Dean Jones. And in this series, I ask charity leaders and change makers to share their why, the purpose, experiences and values that drive their work. Each episode goes beyond job titles and campaigns to uncover the real stories behind social impact leadership, exploring what it takes to stay resilient, purposeful and compassionate in a demanding sector. Today, we're exploring those themes through the lens of music, media and opportunity, and I'm really pleased to be joined by Ashley Samuels-McKenzie, co-host of the How I Became podcast and media lead at In Music in Media, a social enterprise using music and media to create alternative development pathways for young people who don't always fit easily into traditional systems. Ash, thank you so much for joining me. Let's start, as we always do on this podcast, with that central question. What is your why? When you think about your work, from video and sound to coaching and podcasting, what would you say is your underlying why? What keeps you in this space doing what you do?
I would say my why is to continue to illuminate pathways for people, whether that be through creative endeavors and creative access, or through supporting people to their next step through coaching.
And for listeners who may not have come across you before, how do you introduce yourself and the different hats you're wearing at the moment?
I would say I'm a music and media focused entrepreneur who has a keen interest and passion to support communities. I do that through music events. I do that through food offerings, having recently just closed a restaurant. And I do that through In Music and Media, where we support the next generation of young people.
And can you take us back to where creativity first showed up in your life? So music, words, images, and when you first realized it might be more than just a hobby?
Great question. I think, like perhaps many young people around the time of 8 Mile, the film coming out, Eminem's film, that inspired quite a lot of us youngsters to try and rap. And I recall trying to record something on a camcorder with a couple of friends and just continuing to do it until I feel like I got okay enough to show some of my music to new people. From there, we started doing it on the playground and at school and were supported within that. And then from there, the critical moment, I think, was sitting with my closest friends and reciting a few verses. And after I did that, there was a silence for a few seconds and they're like, that's pretty good, actually. And from there, I was like, okay, if they think it's good, they think it's all right, then I'm home free. And from there, I continued to practice, continued to record and perform, and had many great experiences along that way.
So can you remember the verses that you recited to your friends?
Oh, barely. I think, what was there? I think the first 2 rhymes was, when I rhyme, I break down all the barriers and cook up rhymes like Ainsley Harriott.
Okay, excellent. I like it. You know, for anyone listening, I think they might be reciting that back to you at some stage. Are you happy to give us some more of those as we go into the interview?
Yeah, I can try and think of a few more that I got from the earliest days.
Excellent. Okay. You describe yourself as a poetic lyricist, voiceover artist, and an intuitive coach. How do those strands come together in the way you work with people?
I think I've been very lucky to have been exposed and had a wide range of experiences within my life, from music and performance to film and production to coaching and mentoring with an organization for a few years. And I think that has allowed me to have quite a deep understanding of people, where they may be and where they're trying to get to, meaning that I have a way of being able to talk with someone and understand them and get where they need to be, whether that is professionally, whether that is personally, emotionally, in order to guide them. And I think that's where the intuitive coach element comes in.
Talking about how you communicate with people, I'm aware that you had and probably still have, it still exists. So it's the How I Became podcast. Can you talk about How I Became for anyone who hasn't heard it? How do you describe the podcast and what you and Charles were trying to do with it?
How I Became sprung from lockdown, where Charles and I had launched an online platform that brought together leaders within the creative industry, from advertising from the tech companies, from the trade bodies, into conversations and online roundtables around what they thought were the most important topics to discuss. It ranged from diversity, equity, and inclusion to what's the relevance of advertising in this changing world, to how does sustainability look for production these days, and many other topics. And from that, we kept hearing a recurring theme of people not knowing how to get to the next step within their careers, the glass ceilings. And from that, we chose to create How I Became as a way of demystifying that pathway to the top, and also telling the inspirational stories, telling the unscripted stories of inspirational leaders. And that's where the concept of How I Became came about, where we tell these, we take people through the lives of these people. And with that, me being a lyricist and a poet, I was able to create a poem for the intro of each episode. And as we developed it, I think there was one particular episode where I started creating a poem as we were going, and that then became a theme that I then weaved into the later episodes, where I'd always create one at the start and then one fresh from what had been told within that interview.
Great. It sounds like quite a unique way of summarizing a conversation, but also a unique way of telling somebody's story and getting engagement in that story as well. The show spends time on people's full journey, so from their childhood, their setbacks, their breakthroughs, especially for leaders in creative and tech spaces, as you mentioned. What were you hoping listeners, particularly younger or emerging creatives, would take from those stories? You mentioned about the glass ceiling. That obviously plays quite heavily in terms of what you were trying to achieve. But there are other things as well.
I would hope that it helps people see that the sky can be the limit, and where you are at this current moment isn't where you always have to be. I recall being at Cannes Lions a few years ago, and a young lady recognized me and Charles, and she said, you're from How I Became. Thank you so much. Your podcast helped me continue to drive my own business idea to bring it to fruition. And I thought that's exactly what it's about, kind of inspiring people to allow them to see, you know what? Yeah, I can do this, or, I'm not confined to what I think now. I just need to keep going, keep trying, and not give up.
Great. Thank you. Is there an episode or a guest story that's really sort of stayed with you and maybe shifted how you think about your own path and inspired you to go on to do sort of things that you want to achieve?
There was a few, but I think one of the most inspiring ones and touching ones for me was Taban Shuresh, who was born in Kurdistan, whose father was a freedom fighter against Saddam Hussein's regime, and a poet as well, actually.
Right.
And at the age of 6, she was arrested with her mum and her brother and taken to pretty much a death camp. On the way to being driven out into the desert to be buried alive, there was a change of guard in the bus they were in, and that bus driver said, "I'm from Kurdistan, I'm going to drive you to freedom, and you just need to disappear," essentially. She then spent, I believe, 9 months traversing through the war-torn country of, I think it was Iran, the war-torn country, every now and again being visited by freedom fighters sent by her dad to get to the border through desolate cities that had just been bombed out and no one was there. And as they almost reached the checkpoint, her father was somewhere else with her family, almost celebrating with kefir, the drink. They drank the drink, and it turned out it was poison, and they'd been hired by Saddam Hussein. Luckily, the National Cross of the Salvation Army heard about it and got him to safety. And Taban came over to the UK, and that's where her story begins. That one was really inspiring to see how someone can start from such a troubled and adverse place to then make it to set up the charity and support the people that she does.
And so that would almost have been her why in terms of what she went on to do. You've talked about your why, what you did. Do you have moments of adversity that you kind of think back on, reflect on, and that cause you to kind of want to do things in particular that in the directions that you're going at the moment or hope to go into in the future? Are there points of adversity that you also kind of see as a stimulus for kind of doing something positive and making change?
Yeah, and I think it just starts with coming from Northampton, from somewhere that's not a big city, that's not massively well known around, but being able to go to different places. First was Staffordshire when I went to university, meeting people there, next to London where I set up Unity in Motion with Charles just over 10 years ago. And seeing that it doesn't matter where you're from, there's an element of luck to life, or an element of creating your own luck and pathways to being able to leverage and develop on what you've created. But anyone can do extraordinary things if they don't give up and don't listen to the voices in their head that say you can't do it, because that's our biggest enemy.
Thank you for that. I'm going to move on to in music, in media. So alongside the podcast, you're media lead at In Music, in Media. For those that don't know it, how do you explain what that organisation is all about in simple terms? And there's a founder to that organisation, and you play a big part in the sort of day-to-day running of that organisation. Can you tell us about how all that works?
So in its current iteration, In Music, in Media is an alternate provision, so an alternate school, primarily for young people that have been excluded from mainstream school and are in an alternate school, that are then able to be placed in different facilities, different things, activities that can keep them active. But it started as Daniel Johnson, the founder, doing workshops in schools, working with the pupil referral units and youth offenders to help them channel their energy through creating music, creating songs, and developing their artistic passions. And it's interesting because I was actually a beneficiary of this back when I was in school, and we were identified as being like the musical kids of the year. And we were actually joined one of his workshops that crossed the bridge from us going to school and performing to having experiences within recording studios, and then performing at the Racehorse, which is now the Black Prince, and the Sound House, which is still stands. I think it's a Moldovan social club now. But they gave us some early experiences of music and performance. Now it stands as an organisation, a CIC, that's there to develop young people that have an interest in music and media to the next stage. How do they look in a more professional sense? If they make music, how are they presenting themselves? Do they know about PRS? Do they know about publishing and the rights to music? Do they understand how they need to look if they want to get a job within the creative industry? This is what it exists for now. And I think it's really important because, again, coming from a small town outside of any major city, the visibility, the knowledge, the ladders, the pathways into creative industry are not very visible. They're not very visible at all. And the more that we can do to support young people in identifying how they can enter it, the more possibility there is for an industry to thrive here, as well as ladders to different cities and different opportunities.
And would you say, my understanding, my observation is there is an abundance of talent in that town of Northampton that's just waiting to emerge and waiting for those ladders to drop down so that they can kind of climb them and move on to the successes that are awaiting them. Would you say that's right? There is an abundance of talent for whatever reason in Northampton. It's quite unique to Northampton in some respects, would you say?
Yeah, and I've heard from quite a few people that there is an abnormally large amount of creatives in this town, from musicians to artists to film and photographers. And I feel like with the right bridges and the right how can I say it, if the ground is tilled in the right way, then more people can see how they can be a part of this. I think Becky Carrier does great work with the Northampton Film Festival and the other elements that she does. And those things are so important to continue to be developed and thrive, so that more and more people say, you know what, if I do this, I have opportunities of exposure or opportunities of, developing on from where I am.
Great. The work that you do is described as providing life-changing solutions for young people facing, more often than not, challenging circumstances through music and media projects and workshop. What does that actually look like on the ground? How would somebody coming in, being confronted by that experience, what would that look like for them?
Well, we have quite a unique approach in where we sit with the young person, we identify what they like doing, and then start to work with them through that lens of, okay, you want to be a music producer, let's say. These are the nuts and bolts of it. We get them to start working on the foundations of it, and then slowly and gradually expose them to more and more. Okay, now you want to work on chords. Now you want to work, instead of using samples, now we're going to show you how to sequence your own drums and sequence your own synths. So then you become someone that's able to create something from scratch. And that's the approach we take, so that as they're learning, they're really grasping the fundamentals. And from fundamentals, you can build and develop on that.
Great. A big part of your world is the musically unorthodox strand, the MU strand, elements like MU education, MU club, and MU social value. Can you talk us through those and how they fit together as a pathway for young people? And are they part of the same thing as a part of the music in media? Are they separate? Are they all part of the same thing?
Well, they're birthed from a similar vein, but the MU is more the platform. It's where our young people will then develop and be showcased.
Okay.
The MU also has a conference that's happening in April, actually, where we talk about these different pathways, what's being done, what's new in this sector, where is the effectiveness really happening, and how is this developing onward. MU social value, that's also an arm of it that's being developed at the moment and will be quite prevalent towards the end of the year. And in terms of how of what we've done here, changing things, elevating things, supporting things in the right way to then get outcomes and results.
Right. And what kinds of young people are you working with in terms of their situations, any barriers, aspirations? How do they usually find their way to you? I think you mentioned it can sometimes be young people who might be facing exclusion from mainstream education. Is that the main entry in terms of the support you're providing?
That's the main entry for the alternate provision. But then more for the MU side, we then work with young people that are facing needs, so not in education, employment or training, and also just young talented people that want to develop their craft. We have, I say, wide net, but we do have multiple ways in which people can work with us and how we can develop them.
Right. And when you sit down with a young person that's perhaps going through the in music, in media route, what are you hearing from them about school and opportunity and how they see their own futures? Are they full of hope, or are they coming to you with less confidence and they need that confidence boosting from the work that you do with them?
That's a great question. I think it does vary. I think for some, they want to be around music. They want to be in the studio. So they just fly, and it gives them experiences that they can't get anywhere else. Some of them have said, like, I can't believe I get to do this in school time.
Yeah.
But for other students, they may still be finding their feet at the moment. So it might be a bit more tentative to get involved. But I think for the ones, it really is rewarding for the ones that want to be there, that come in enthusiastic, smiling, buzzing for the day. That's what it's all about, really, because those seeds grown and go anywhere.
What do you think it is about music and media that seems to reach young people in a way that more traditional classrooms often don't, especially for those who struggled in mainstream settings? What is it about that media that connects with them,
I think it's
or they connect with it?
the opportunity to create, the opportunity to learn and create a medium which oftentimes they're not necessarily able to learn within school. Because I mean, a lot of the times media studies and that kind of stuff doesn't really happen until either sixth form or college years. But being able to provide that access earlier really allows them to utilize and connect with something that they're used to. I mean, for many people that were born, let's say, pre the year 2000, we're used to a drastically different world where, I remember having a camcorder, but not understanding, how do I make this into a film? How do I edit this together? And even then in the early 2000s, it was quite a process to do that. You needed a lot of equipment. You needed, a good PC. You needed a lot of things that weren't very
Yeah.
accessible. Whereas now, with the advent of how far technology's come, even an old phone, maybe 5, 6, 7 years old now, can still edit videos. You can still make music on them. There's a lot you can do on them now. So by enabling people to, hey, this is the tech and this is how you use it, it can then almost change something, give them a valuable skill that won't leave them.
Great. Can you share a story of a young person whose journey within music and media really sort of captures what you have achieved or what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, we have one young student who's now in their second academic year with us. They wanted to be a music producer, make beats. We taught them the foundations, the nuts and bolts, and now they come in, they make like 2 or 3 beats a day. They've created their own YouTube channel where they've emulated different producers' YouTube channels that kind of remix videos of the style of music they're creating and presenting themselves a certain way. And that really exemplifies what we're about in music and media. It's that development to get them to a professional level.
Great. From your point of view, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that adults have about young people who end up in alternative education or youth provision, if any?
I would say that sometimes it's something small that can then lead young people down a path that's very difficult to correct, a course that's very difficult to correct. You know, sometimes it could be an exclusion or something, a misunderstanding at school sometimes that paints one student a certain way that then can affect their life, you know, moving forwards. And I think it's important to know, as people that may be looking from the outside in, that sometimes people just need an alternate way. They need an alternate way. They need an alternate way to interact with things. They need an alternate way to learn, an alternate way to express themselves that may not be as conventional as the, you know, 80 to 90% of students.
Yeah.
But if you're able to provide that for that young person, they excel massively, and it can then positively affect the other areas of their lives.
Has that been achieved through collaboration? So, for example, collaborating with schools or local authorities or other services? And if you have had to collaborate in these sorts of things, what have you learnt through that collaboration process?
I think at this moment in time, there's been small bits of collaboration or us kind of working with students that may have come through the council, etc. But I feel like there needs to be a more unified creative board, creative council, creative collective that can have this data live about what's happening in the creative industries of the region, and then form strong cases to our councils, to our boards of education, to our accessible pathways to highlight what is needed in schools of today. Because, gosh, it's been a while since I left school now, 20 years or so, but things have changed so rapidly now that school was a little bit outdated then. Now, without adaptation, kids are just going to get bored. Kids need a bit more these days, or young people need a bit more these days to see their relevance within society, their relevance within the world, to give them hope and passion. I think hope it can be very difficult, I can imagine now, as a young person, looking at this world where there's so much going on and feeling a little bit disempowered, feeling a little bit hopeless, because the advent of social media can heighten and reinforce a lot of things that are happening in the world, which is something that we didn't really have to face as much when we were young.
No. Do you think then that social media is putting a spotlight on things that already existed, or as a result of social media, we're seeing more of those things, and therefore when you talked and referred to hope and hopelessness, that people can feel more hopeless because they're seeing more of it or because there is more of it?
That's a good question. I think it's a bit of both, because perhaps when we just had the news basically to tell us what's happening in the world, and then newspapers or online, if you got your news off that way, there was less places where you'd see certain elements of news.
Yeah.
Now you can sit there on any given platform and just flick and flick and flick and flick, and you're seeing all this stuff, some of it good, some of it bad, some of it indifferent, some of it's more selling the dream, some of it's more this is how I did it, which I think is good content. But I recall seeing there was considerations of limiting social media for people over 16. And I thought about that. First I thought, oh, that could be really restrictive. But then I thought, hold on, if you have less distraction as you're growing up, perhaps that can then develop you to being more productive,
And creative.
because you're going to need to find something you're going to be looking for things to fill that time, as opposed
So do you
to
mean
always
in
having...
the process of taking something like a phone device from somebody, a younger person, that you're actually opening up the opportunity for them to be more creative, and therefore that's an argument for doing that?
I believe so, because being bored or being in a situation where you need to create your own whatever, I think that's a good space to be in, because again, the generations before, there were times when we were bored.
Yeah.
When you had
Any
4
reason
TV channels.
Yeah, I completely get what you're saying there. And the only reason I ask you, because particularly for you, you're in a sector where media plays a central role, and you can't detach social media from the use of a camera or a use of a device to kind of do stuff. And so does create some problems, doesn't it, in terms of people's access to things that can help them be creative, for example. So maybe there's some thinking around that to support
So
the
I'm
sort of work
thinking
you're
around
doing.
that kind of, see how it would actually, how it could actually play out. But I feel like a limit or something could definitely foster more interest in other activities,
Yeah.
whether that's sport, whether that's, baking, whether that's, base creativity, photography or film or anything like that.
Yeah. Great. That's an interesting. I went slightly off subject, but it's an interesting thing to think about. And I was actually really interested in just the whole conversation around whether or not devices should be banned for certain age groups. And no doubt that conversation will continue on for a good while yet.
Yeah.
When you think about impact beyond sort of qualifications and attendance, what signs tell you that the work you're doing is really landing with a young person? Because it doesn't necessarily have to lead to that individual becoming a successful artist or going into the industry. There could be other things positives that come from that experience that don't necessarily take them on that journey, but have a lasting impact, positive impact with them.
I think one of the most positive impacts is when a young people feels they're in the right environment to express themselves freely.
Mhm.
Whether that's, we have some students that will just come in and sing, not to record, but just
Mhm.
to play songs and sing for hours.
Mm.
You leave them, they'll sing for hours in one of our studios, and they they leave saying, yeah, I had a great day today. I really enjoyed it. And I
Mhm.
feel like that is really important, especially if you've been seen as a naughty kid, then, a lot of the times then the way you're treated is as a naughty kid.
Mm.
Whereas we all make mistakes.
Mhm.
And if you made one mistake that's led you to a certain position, you shouldn't really be, it shouldn't be a continual factor in your psyche and in your mind that you've done something wrong and now you're here. It's more like, okay, things have happened, you're here. How can you make your day better? How can you
Mm.
how can you build your self-worth and confidence?
Mhm.
I feel like that is the thing, the critical factor I find with these young people. It's allowing them to have a voice and expression.
Great, thanks for that. You yourself, you're in front of the mic quite a lot and you're behind the camera, but you're also a leader and a role model to young people. Certainly from my perspective, I see you in that way. How have you grown into that role over time? Have you felt that journey yourself, that you've kind of grown into that kind of role model leader role? Or have you always been like that?
Feel it's a result of the steps taken
Mm.
along life's path that have led me
Mm.
to go through my own journey, my own discoveries, my own points of growth and self-confidence, be that, in front of the lens, be that behind the lens, be that behind a microphone, be that on stage.
Mhm.
And then understanding what it takes to be in certain positions, how to be ready for certain opportunities, and how you can get yourself ahead by doing the right things at the right times.
Taking those opportunities and running with them, really.
Yeah, and being ready in whatever shape or form that could be. It could be having your website ready. It could be making sure that your Instagram looks a certain way, or your
Mhm.
LinkedIn looks a certain way, or you have the right PDFs to send out or the right videos to send out. But it is about knowing what you need at the right time and for whom.
Mhm.
And with that, you can continue to grow. And that's been a big passion of mine, having been a mentor and coach for a few years, supporting people on their journeys. It's
Mm.
something that becomes intrinsic to me and something very important to me too.
Being ready, I like that. Have there been moments where perhaps you haven't been ready, or your own confidence or sense of identity has been tested? And how have you worked through those times where things have been more challenging and, yeah, as I say, not feeling quite as ready as you'd like to feel?
Yeah, I think that is the flip side, because sometimes you're never always going to be 100% ready. There are going to be curveballs in life. I think it is how you can respond to those situations.
Hmm.
Some people are very good off the fly. Other people prefer to do that prep work.
Hmm.
And again, it's just about what are your systems or processes or structures in place that can help you be ready at the time you need it most. It could be like a mantra you have in your phone. It could be notes that you've made
Mm.
ahead of time. But, you know, life isn't always going to go 100% to plan. And even
Mm.
just by knowing that and accepting that, you can be ready for when a curveball hits.
I'd like you to be my mentor, Ash.
No problem.
You talked about being a mentor. You also, I think very early on in our conversation, you talked about the fact that you kind of know people, you've got a sense about people. I think you're sort of intuitive. When you think about the mentoring that you've done and the work you've done with young people, and whether it's on your podcast or with a person within in music, in media, or even sort of a client on the camera, what have you learned from that experience of working so closely with people that need you?
I would say one of the biggest things is we often have the answers to our challenges, but sometimes we need the right questions, the right way of thinking about something to elicit that. I think that is one of the most important things I've learned, is that we do have answers. We do usually know a way out. Sometimes it needs to be elicited. Sometimes we just need to be real and say, okay, yeah, look, I just need to stop doing that in order to get to there. Or I've got to drop this in order to get to there. And I think that is one of the most critical things I've found about working with people, is that we have those answers. Sometimes we're just not giving ourselves enough time to get to that answer.
Thank you. So looking back over your journey so far, what's one decision or turning point you're especially glad you said yes to?
Gosh, there's a few. But I would say it was most probably in music and media and the founding of that, because it was remote. Well, so Daniel was going into schools, and then lockdown happened while he was like midway through a project. He then made that project remote. So he had 3 or 4 different young people. They came together. They wanted to make a song. So they analyzed the song, and they were able to create it together, like online. Really, really cool how it was done. And then from there, Youth Music, who supported the project, said, we'd love to support you again. But the question was, well, we've already made it remote. What else can we do? And they said, we want you to have your own physical building, or your own physical space. And as Daniel told me that, it set me into seeking mode. And I was looking everywhere for the right building, high and low, asking people, talking to people, pushing out that energy. And then in the way that serendipity happens and things work, I got a call from someone who said, I heard you're looking for space. We went and had a look at the space. Everything worked out. And like 3 or 4 days later, we were given the keys. And it was like the perfect location, the perfect building for us that was steeped in music and media already.
Great.
I think that has been one of my most poignant things I've said yes to in recent years, given how it's grown and how it is now supporting the people that we set out for it to support.
And so when you look ahead, and it's Daniel, you're the founder, that's right, and you work in close partnership with one another, is that right?
Yeah.
So when you both look ahead sort of 5 or 10 years into the future, what would you love to see in music, in media, and the work you're doing, sort of known for, and sort of how would you like to see it grow?
We'd love to see more of our young people having gone full circle through our project, from, starting where they came from, to having that provision to develop, to then having access, creative employability, or their own sustainable way of creating and being an artist, whether that's music or visual, to then being able to give back and support more, so that we see more creative mentors, more creative development pathways, and then more people that have found their way into the industry in whichever shape or form that may be.
Great, thank you. And more widely, what changes would you like to see in how we value creative skills and cultural capital in education, youth work and employment? You talked about there being perhaps not enough collaboration between yourselves, schools and authorities, and perhaps having a panel that kind of really sort of stands up for that part of the work that you're very good at doing. What would you like to see changing in the future around that area?
I would like to see more ways of creating visibility for young people to see what the creative industry is, what it looks like nationally, BBC, Sky TV, all of those big things, down to how it looks locally, your local radio stations, your local filmmakers, and then having an understanding of how they can earn and develop within whichever element of that industry they wish to get into.
As much as anything, this podcast is all about charity sector. It's for aspiring charity leaders. It's also for philanthropists and people that perhaps, and businesses and other organisations that want to support organisations like in music, in media. What does it take sort of financially to run an organisation like in music, in media? Do the funds come through grants and that sort of thing? Is it come through local authority support? How does it do what it does? Because inevitably everyone's got bills to pay and that sort of thing. So how does that work on that side of things?
So it began through primarily grants to begin with, but naturally grants aren't a sustainable way of sustaining any kind of business. The model is then we work with schools that they place their students with us, in which we get a fee for teaching them for the day. So that then allows us to have a sustainable model that can grow and
Mhm.
scale, as opposed to one that is working kind of grant to grant, hand to mouth until they can get the next one, because
Mm.
many organizations kind of falter if that's the only way they're able to generate income.
Yeah. But that still is a form of supporting you,
Yeah,
that you would welcome grants and
most
support.
most definitely. We still we most we've got a few. You know, we look at different grants that are happening, the right ones that can support us for where we're at this moment in time. And
Mhm.
I think for like the kind of support that organizations like ourselves and many that work with young people will need is that kind of infrastructural support of staffing. You know, like, okay, this grant or this donation will support, a manager or a specialist in this area for 6, 12, 18, 24 months. That then allows the organization to have stability along that one vein,
Mhm.
and
Great.
it not become something that then is a cost to them each month that can create financial strain.
So for somebody who's involved in philanthropy or commissioning or social corporate responsibility from a business, and they're curious about backing this kind of work, what would you want them to understand in terms of what they can do and how that might benefit you?
I think it would The thing I'd like them to understand would be the power and impact they can have through supporting the right element of one of these businesses, organizations, or social enterprises. As I say, I think from what I've seen personally, it is about the longevity of personnel and the assurance of it, because from what I've seen, a lot of people can be a bit apprehensive to work with charities or organizations that may not have they may not be full businesses in that way,
Mhm.
because it can be seen sometimes as being all unstable, or how is it going to work long term? But for the right people that really want to support one of these kind of organizations, it's about asking the questions and being like, okay, well, what do you need and what gives you the longevity that you need? I
Mhm.
think that's a critical question, because then that organization will be able to spell it out and say, well, this is what we need here, and this is how long it will enable us to do X, Y, and Z.
Great, thank you. For a young listener who's creative and doesn't fit easily into school and is wondering if there's a place for them generally in the world, what would you want to say to them?
For a young creative, you have more tools and more visibility to how different people have crafted, created, developed themselves than ever before in the history of time. Yeah, I would say so. It's just about researching, being hungry for new knowledge. It's everywhere now. In order to learn more about creativity, learn more about your craft, and learn tips and techniques that can elevate you. I even still do it now. There's a great YouTube channel called Studio Binder,
Okay.
which shares different techniques that filmmakers use, different ways that they tell stories. I just find myself watching it, geeking out, just like, I love it. It allows me to sharpen my saw and think about how I can use some of these techniques in my own.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. We've reached the sort of end of the formal part of our conversation, of the questions I hope to ask you, and you've answered them brilliantly. So much in there that I think is useful for anyone who's interested in this part of the sort of the sector. So we're going to move into the quickfire section of the interview, which is just a bit of fun to finish things off. Really, the first question is tea or coffee, Ash, and how do you take it?
These days, coffee seems to be the go-to with two young children that wake me up early. And outside of that, maybe a green tea.
Green tea. Okay, great. Thank you. And if you had the choice between a studio session, a live event, or quiet writing time, which do you enjoy most these days?
I feel like
Mhm.
now it's quiet writing time. At
Yeah.
many other points, it'd be the other two, but I think now it's a time of reflection and refocus.
And when you are writing and finding that quiet time to write, do you do that as an early bird or a night owl? You're an early morning writer or a late night writer?
Late night writer most of the time. Early mornings, I try and get to the gym
Okay.
before the school run, and then in the evenings is when I reflect and write down my bits and bobs.
So you, by the sounds of it, you're an early bird and a night owl. So you're burning the candle at both ends.
Yes, yeah, a bit of both. There's not much sleep that happens.
Yeah, I think I'm the same. After a long day of recording, editing, or working with young people, what helps you switch off and reset? You've talked about your writing, you've talked about going to the gym. Are there other things that you do that really work in terms of unwinding?
A good film or a good documentary. And sometimes just sticking on my headphones and just listening to music.
Great, thank you. And what's one thing about you that might surprise people who know you mainly through your podcast or your media work? Is there something else that very few people know about you they might be surprised about?
Gosh, perhaps I was in a band for 5 years. Not
Okay,
many people may know that are listening to the podcast. That's probably one of the main things.
right. And what did you do? Were you behind the mic, or are you playing an
Yeah, I
instrument?
was the vocalist and rapper singer outside of the instrumentalist. Yeah,
Great. And can they find that work anywhere, or would you rather they didn't?
maybe rather they didn't until we create
Okay.
something new.
No worries, that's fine. So, final question for anyone listening who's been sort of moved by what you shared and wants to support or collaborate with or refer in music, in media, what's the best next step that they can take? And it could be making a donation. Who knows? Is there somewhere they can go to do all those things?
Yeah, you can, through our website, inmusicinmedia.com, you can find all the information, you can find our contact details, and then have a conversation with us. I think what we've managed to create within our facility is something that is massively unique, not just to Northampton, but a lot of the country. You know, we're actively working on that bridge between someone starting and having a passion to someone in the industry and being able to make that sustainable for themselves and their families. And the time, money, support that's invested in us can go a long way, not just in supporting the organization, but supporting and developing the next generation of talent that really need support in this day and age to assist them in building more resilience, building more confidence, and building more skills within themselves.
Brilliant, thank you. Right back at the beginning of the podcast, I'd really put you on the spot and asked you to share a poem. Do you have a poem that you can share with us?
Yeah, give me one moment and I'll think of one. I'll find one.
And when you are focusing on your poetry, is there somewhere you go to perform the poetry? To there particular events that you get involved in, or do you do that sort of in your own time and for your own benefit?
I have done. I've been to a few like slam poetry events and things like that where I've been able to share poems with different people. And I find that poetry is quite a broad thing.
Hmm.
A lot of my poetry comes out more like a cappella lyrics compared
Okay.
to some others that have a different way of doing it. And this one was called Rise. I wrote this a little while ago. Through peaks and troughs, good times and bad, you will triumph if you never cease to try. Whether you missed out on sleep or had thoughts oh so deep, today, my friend, you must get up and rise. Against the armies of foes and the angry echoes, hold no fear inside of your eyes. And when stress weighs a ton and it seems far from fun, my friend, you must get up and must rise. The war is not won until the battle is over, and when the battleground's clear and heavy thoughts become sober. So no matter the challenge, minute or gigantic in size, I tell thee, my friend, you must get up and must rise.
Thank you, Ash. Thanks for such a rich and reflective conversation and for showing how music and media can be far more than nice extras. They can be serious routes into confidence, community, and meaningful futures for young people who've often been overlooked. You've given a real sense of how storytelling, whether through your How I Became podcast or through the Musically Unorthodox programs, can open up space for people to see themselves differently and to imagine paths that didn't seem possible before. And so to everyone listening, I hope this episode has prompted you to think differently about creativity, not as an add-on, but as a powerful tool for education, inclusion, and social change. And if you found this conversation useful, please like, follow, and subscribe the Night Owl Philanthropy podcast on your usual platforms and share it with someone who works with young people, funds creative projects, or simply loves seeing potential unlocked. Thanks, Ash.
Thank you.